Opacity. Opacity is really interesting. Opacity is whether you can see through the paint or not. And there's two types of opacity, I guess. Firstly, when we look at the actual pigment itself on a microscopic level. If the pigment is transparent, a bit like a crystal, and light can travel through it, it's termed a transparent pigment. Conversely, if it's more like a billiard ball, it's a solid object where the light bounces off it, but it doesn't travel through it, that is an opaque pigment. Now, you can have blends of the both, generally not of the same pigment per se, but you can have blends of opaque and transparent pigments. But the big thing to remember is a transparent pigment or paint painted over the top of another colour has a good chance of showing that colour through. So sometimes people will think that the colours are blending or mixing together. That's true. What you see is blended or mixed together. For instance, yellow over the top of blue. But they're not physically blending. It's purely the light blending on the way through. Now at Matisse, we actually have two listings for opacity. We have the pigment listing, which is literally what the pigment is, but we also have a paint listing. So whether the paint itself is opaque or semi-transparent or transparent. And the reason for that is some pigments are very intense, like phthalo blue for instance, but it is actually a transparent pigment. However, when you paint it straight out of the tube, it might look almost black, a really, really dark blue, and it certainly won't look transparent. But the pigment is actually transparent. Versus ultra blue, ultramarine blue, which is actually an opaque pigment when you look at it under a microscope, but it is quite a weak colour, especially when compared to a lot of the other blues, and phthalo blue being one of them. So it's quite weak, and so therefore can, in the paint, look a little bit transparent. So if you put one coat over the top of a yellow, for instance, it might look a bit green rather than just covering in one go. And that's because ultra blue is, in the paint, a little bit transparent. And the transparency ratings are on the colour card or on our website, or indeed they're on the tubes as well. You'll see little square boxes near the colour name, and a solid black square means it's opaque, and a square that's literally just a box means it's transparent, and half coloured in, as you can guess, means that it's semi-transparent. So taking note of the transparency or the opacity of the paint can make a real difference both when you're mixing and certainly when you're glazing with various different colours. So now what we're going to do while I talk, you're going to paint these boxes in. Starting with the structure, make it as thick as you can get it because that shows what the structure is like. The flow, on the other hand, you'll see will flow out and the fluids will be really thin. Make sure you cover it enough so you can actually see that it's quite a bit higher gloss than the other ones. And just keep making your way down and painting it out. The main idea being that you can see the difference between each one of these formulas. So in the Matisse range of paints, we have different viscosity and sheen levels for different techniques, all the way through to inks and then background colours. So I'm just going to describe one by one in relation to each other. So structure, which is, I guess, probably our most popular range of paint, a full-bodied, heavy, sort of buttery acrylic. You can add water with it, you can obviously add mediums with it and all that sort of thing, but it's the thickest, most impasto sort of paint. Then there's flow. Flow is all the same colours pretty well as the structure, but made on a different acrylic base, structured differently, so it's just a bit thinner. You won't have any brush strokes left behind. The flow, as the name suggests, will flow out. It's the consistency roughly of cream. And then the fluids come in about half the number of colours, but they are really, really thin. Nearly as thin as water. You'll never get them quite as thin as water. Really thin, but they're still a paint. You'll have opaque and transparent colours, and the fluids dry to quite a high gloss. The structure's probably the next sheen down, and then the flow is quite matte, a bit like an acrylic gouache. And the structure and the flow, so made on a different acrylic, but they still have the same amount of pigment and the same pigments in them. So the colours will be, I'll say exactly the same, because it's a slightly different acrylic. They may look fractionally different, but in reality, you're probably not going to tell the difference. The fluids, on the other hand, have slightly less pigmentation in them, mainly just because they fall out of solution and are very hard to get back in if it had the same amount of pigment, but it's very close. So those are the three, I'm going to call them paints, and the different consistencies or viscosities. Then we move to ink. Now, the ink is a pigmented acrylic ink. So it's not an alcohol ink, it does not have dyes in it, it has pigments in it. And what that means is they won't fade in sunlight or anything like that. But all the inks are transparent, so they behave more like inks. They're all transparent, in other words, you can see through them. They will dry water fast, and as I say, light fast. They can go through airbrush, through calligraphy pens, dip pens, just not through a fountain pen. Are background colours. And they are basically a coloured gesso, a low tooth coloured gesso. There's 40 colours, they're still acrylic, they've got a built-in sealer. They'll go down if you want basically a background that's coloured rather than white, which is what you would normally get with a gesso.
And last but not least, our newest addition to the Matisse range, our Matisse Studio. All single series, a whole lot of really fun colours. This versatile medium-bodied acrylic is sort of halfway between structure and flow, and it's perfect for supporting the creative expression of emerging and professional artists alike. We currently offer it in 120ml tubes, a 500ml easy squeeze pouch, and of course, our 1 litre bottles. Hopefully that clears up the entire Matisse range for you and helps you understand a bit better what each of the products does.